Okay, we're going to begin. Good afternoon, and thank you all for coming today. My name is Dr. Brett Bennington. I'm the chair of the Department of Geology, Environment, and Sustainability at Hofstra, and it's my great pleasure to welcome you to the final session of the second annual Hofstra University Presidential Symposium, Solutions for a Sustainable Tomorrow. Sustainable solutions can be found at the intersection of science, economics, and social equity, with education playing a very important role. And there's little doubt that climate change is our largest and most daunting sustainability challenge. During yesterday's panel discussion on the aftermath of Superstorm Sandy, a question was raised on the role the media plays in educating the public to respond to disaster warnings. The final session of the symposium now will address a similar question as it applies to keeping the public informed about the ongoing climate crisis. I just want to remind everyone that all of the sessions from Tuesday, Wednesday, and this morning were recorded, and you can watch them on YouTube. All you have to do is go to the symposium website, and for each session there's an orange button that says watch online. If you click on that, it'll bring up the YouTube video, and you can check out any session that you missed. And I encourage everybody to consult the program. It's easy to find. Just Google Hofstra Presidential Symposium. It comes up as the first hit. Take a look at the program, watch as many sessions as you can, and I think you will discover that there's a lot happening at Hofstra relating to sustainability with a lot more to come. So watch, listen, and get involved. With that, it's my great pleasure to introduce Murillo, Vice Dean and Professor of Radio, Television, and Film in the Herbert School of Communication, who will introduce the moderator for this afternoon's panel.
Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us. It's great to be here. This session is called Covering the Climate Crisis, Local Reporting on the Environment in the Long Island Advocate. And as Brett pointed out, my name is Murillo. I'm a professor in the Lawrence Herbert School of Communication, and I am currently the Vice Dean, entering my 5th year, working alongside Dean Lukashevitz, Dean Luke, in the Dean's office. And one of the responsibilities I've taken on as Vice Dean, which is one of the most pleasurable roles I play in the school, is working alongside the student journalist and the director of the Long Island Advocate, Scott Brinton, Professor Brinton, in basically accompanying the work that they're doing. Not necessarily as an advisor, because Scott takes that lead, but certainly accompanying the work that they're doing. So it's been a real pleasure. I want to thank you, Brett. Congratulations. I know doing this kind of a 3-day symposium is a heavy lift, so I think we got to give you a warm and drawing our attention to these issues on campus and all the people who are involved. I'm not going to mention others because it's just too long a list to make something like this happen. A lot of people to thank, but rest assured, we at the school, at the Herbert School, we appreciate and recognize the time, dedication, energy that it takes to do that, and we're happy to be a part of it, so thank you for that. I also want to, and I was hoping Susan Poser, the president, was going to join us, but I want to thank you also, Charlie, for being with us. I can speak after being here. I'm entering my 25th year here on campus as a faculty member and now as Vice Dean. Just to let you know, I was appointed in the faculty as a 13-year-old, so if you're trying to calculate my age, you can do the math. But yeah, 25 years, and I can say, I always speak for myself. I don't speak for anybody else, but I think other people would echo my feeling that the mood, the culture in the campus is really positive right now in terms of the dedication to scholarly excellence, in terms of community engagement, in terms of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and the presence that Dr. Poser and yourself have made from events like the barbecues to events like these, I think it leads to that kind of culture, and it feels really good. So with that in mind, actually, a bit of Long Island Advocate swag for you. I had one for Dr. Poser, but she's not here, so I don't know what to do with this one. Well, maybe we'll do a little raffle at the end of the session. Anyway, so again, it's really good to be here. For this panel, essentially our goal really is to share some examples of the environmental justice and sustainability reporting that our students are doing. I mean, it's really focusing on the Long Island Advocate, but we can say a lot of our media, student media programs and projects are addressing these issues. Today, for example, I was driving in, I was stuck in a terrible traffic jam on the Van Wyck Expressway, tuning into the morning show on WRHU. Some of you might tune in. I hope you do listen to the morning show. And just listening, they had Scott on as a guest in the first half hour. And the second half hour is what really moved me. They had two guests, one a faculty member in our law school, Patrick Young, who's an immigration rights attorney here at the school, along with Javier Guzman, who's an organizer with Make the Road New York. Javier was joining them by telephone from the Port Authority, welcoming, receiving 3 buses that came in from Texas with dozens of migrants being shipped to New York. And they had them live on the air talking about this. And hearing that and hearing the students engaging with the 2 guests demonstrates how important our community media are in engaging the communities and also kind of being on top of some of the most important issues of the day. And so the Long Island Advocate is one example of that kind of work that's emanating from the school. And I hope all of you, if you haven't heard of the Advocate, you not tune in, but log on, check it out, look at what we're doing, and also contribute, because we're opening, and that the idea of opening the spaces for everybody in the community, it's important. So what we wanted to do is focus on the sustainability coverage that's been done, particularly from students, and we have 2 student panelists who are going to join us. And just focus on the hyper-local nature of what the Long Island Advocate is. So they're going to look at 3 general areas, and then so I just want to kind of present those and then throw it to Scott. The 3 main takeaways for today, if you will. The first one is the void in coverage of the local community that exists, right? Another thing that we're working on, and it's thanks again to the president of the grant that was given to the Herbert School to conduct this research project. We'll have more on this in November, but it's a research project looking into the news deserts that exist in these communities, and our communities right here in Hempstead and in Uniondale and in Freeport and all these areas, where we're seeing firsthand the impacts of how when journalists don't cover the communities unless it's an act of violence or if there's some criminality, but for the most part, the communities are ignored. And so filling that void, and we're not alone. This is the idea of news deserts is taking place all over the country. Just so happens to be ironic that we're in the media capital of the world and we have news deserts right here on the island. But so the Long Island Advocate attempts to try to fill that void as best as it could, right? So we're trying to make it a 24/7, ongoing project, not just to be looked at as a exercise for students to do during the semester and then it's done. We know that sea level rise doesn't take a break in December and in the summer break. We know that toxic spills don't take a break during the summer session. We know that environmental racism doesn't take a break during the summer session. So we're trying to keep this going all the time, even in the summer, and engage the communities with this media. And that void is there, and so we're going to talk about how some of our students, and the students are going to talk about some of the work that they're doing to fill that void. But it's not easy, right? There's many challenges in trying to fill that void. Aside from the artificial 15-week semesters, but also the idea of building trust and connections with people in the community. And it's great to have representatives of local organizations that are at the front lines of climate change and trying to make a difference in the local area to join us, because again, and we've heard about this all over the place, all over the country, where student journalists try to do coverage of the community. It's not that easy because you're working in these artificial frameworks of 15-week semesters, and to build trust in especially communities that have been marginalized, have been ignored, have been misrepresented so often, they don't necessarily open their doors to just anybody. So building that trust is one of the challenges, and I think we'll hear some of that. And then finally, what are the issues we should be covering? So let's look forward. What are the stories, the kinds of stories we should be looking at, the issues that we should be paying attention to, and kind of using all our resources that we have here at the Herbert School and at Hofstra to make sure that those issues are reported on and the community understands, and it also feels like they're part of that dialogue with us. So it's a two-way street or a multi-way street, not just typical extractive reporting that we're coming in, taking out, and that's it, and it's all over. So I'm going to keep my mouth shut for the rest of the session, I promise. And I'm going to welcome my good friend and colleague. Just so you know, for those of you who don't know Scott Brinton, he's a professor, an assistant professor of journalism at the Herbert School. He teaches both graduate and undergraduate courses, particularly in investigative journalism and in community journalism. And he is the faculty and I guess we can call executive editor of the Long Island Advocate. He's also been the executive editor of the Long Island Herald, a series of newspapers for years. I don't know, what, 25 years? 28 years, a good chunk of time, more or less how long I've been here, right? And he's also just a really good guy who's really committed to working with and in the community. So I'll throw it to Scott Brinton, and hopefully we'll have a good conversation.
Just like Mario, I started my career at 13, so anyway. Well, so today's format, pretty simple. I'm gonna introduce our students, I'm gonna introduce our speakers right now, and then our students are gonna come up and they're gonna show you a couple examples of their work from the Advocate. They're gonna talk a little bit about their work from the Advocate, and then we're gonna have a little panel discussion in which these guys are gonna do all the questioning and ask the questions, because it's really about them. So I just want to introduce Madeline Armstrong. Maybe you could stand up so people can see who you are. Madeline Armstrong, she is our environmental editor for the Long Island Advocate. She's been with the Long Island Advocate for about 1.5 years now and has done amazing work. She's won 3 Press Club of Long Island awards for environmental reporting in the professional category. So there are two categories. One's for professionals and the other's for students, and she won in the professional category. So that really kind of speaks to the level of work that she's been doing here at the Advocate for the past 1.5 years. And then we have Urvi Gandhi. She's our social justice editor. Why don't you stand up, Urvi? She did some amazing work for a class in online journalism that I teach in the spring, last spring, and she did some amazing work with the Shinnecock Indian Nation. And they invited her back to do, and it all revolving around the environment. And then they invited her back to do a story on the powwow that they recently did, which was the first time in the past 3 years that they'd done it. And she went out along with one of her colleagues, Yal Bonsu, and I went out with them, and we just had an amazing time. So she's going to talk a little bit about those experiences. We have Adrian Esposito. She is executive director of the Citizens Campaign for the Environment. Farmingdale-based organization, but really a statewide organization, right? And they do amazing work on advocacy for any number of environmental issues, many. Water, air, you name it, soil, they do it. And then Rob Weltner, right here in Freeport. It's a Freeport-based organization, but they work across the South Shore cleaning up, essentially picking up garbage. That's their main, that's their main objective. I mean, they do many other things in terms of educating young people. They do a lot of programs. They also work with universities to do water studies and that sort of thing. But mostly what they do is pick up garbage. And by the way, I've been out there with them a number of times picking up the garbage, and there's a lot of it. So they do a wonderful job. So anyway, so without further ado, I want to bring up, why don't we come up one at a time? Madeline, why don't you come up first, and you can talk a little bit about your stories, which are here. Load it up.
Hello, everybody. I'm Madeline. And so let me scroll down a bit. I'm going to start with this one, actually. Okay, so I started working on this particular story in Professor Brinton's class a little, like 1.5 years ago, I think. And so this is about a lake in Southampton, the Agawam Lake, and it's filled with toxic algae. And I spoke with Professor Gobler at Stony Brook University, and he does studies on it every year in addition to other water bodies on Long Island. And he said that here, this was 2021, that this was the worst year they had ever had yet. And so I did this story about a new treatment they were testing out, which was coupling hydrogen peroxide and an ultrasonic technology to treat the algal blooms. And yeah, so they were hopeful that it would work. This is what it looked like. And then these are just some charts of, how it's progressed over the years. That's a picture of what the lake looks like. Not great. And so then recently I decided to follow up because I had also interviewed Adrian, who's here today, and she had mentioned that, that didn't work out too well, the experiment they were trying. And so I did reach out to Professor Gobler, and he said that it worked about in the short term. It worked in the short term, but they need to find more long-term solutions. And so this is kind of like an overview picture of what the lake looks like now. And it's really more about the nutrients that are being put into the water, which is, the nitrogen and the phosphorus. And that's coming from septic tanks and pesticides used on lawns. And so, I also spoke with Mayor Jesse Warren of Southampton, and, they've applied and received a lot of grants for cleaning up the water bodies in Southampton. And so, as a part of this, they have, I think, about $30,000 available for homes, up to $30,000 grants available for people who will change out their septic systems for a lower nitrogen one. And to help the lake. And he also said that now any buildings that are that are in construction, they will also have a lower nitrogen septic tank put in. And so then they also have sewer treatment facilities going in that will treat the water before it's put into the lake. So it's kind of an issue, but I happened upon this one incident in Professor Brinton's class. I mean, I had never done community reporting ever. I'm from the West, I'm from Utah, and I was like, I don't know. And so he was like, write a story hyperlocal to Long Island. And I was like, I don't know. And so I happened upon this, and it's just really sparked a bigger investigation for me into all of this is not unique. Lake Agawam is not unique. It is part of the many, many polluted water bodies on Long Island and surrounding Long Island. And so, and this is harmful algal blooms, but a number of other things too. There's hypoxia, which is a low oxygen in the water, and so then their life forms can't survive, and then there's fish kills. And Professor Gobler at Stony Brook, they put out a report every year about the water qualities, and it's like a map of all of Long Island, the water bodies and the surrounding ones, and what issues are in them. And every single one of them has some sort of pollutant or issue. And this year had the most fish kills ever. He said he was shocked. So that's a very dangerous level of low oxygen in the water. And so I'm working on maybe a collection of stories about the different water bodies on Long Island, or a bigger one about what's being done. But I think, this is something I've become really passionate about over the last couple years. And I think that some people are aware, but it seems to be the same groups of people who I speak to who are aware of the issue, and not everyone. And then just the broader Long Island communities, I mean, they're like, yeah, the lake's gross, but how's that affecting me? When really, in combination with the climate crisis that we're in now, it just creates a really dangerous environment where life forms can't live. And they've even reported pets being injured or killed from the toxic algae. So it is important, and I'm just, I don't know, I'm glad I had the opportunity in Professor Brinton's class to discover this. So yeah.
Hello, my name is Urvi. I'm a junior here, and in the spring semester, this past spring semester, I covered a story up in Southampton in the Shinnecock Nation about their preschool basically installing solar panels and converting entirely to renewable energy. I found the story just by, we had to cover stories in the community for Professor Brinton's class. And after looking around a bit, I decided to see if the Shinnecock Nation had anything going on. And I found the story in this, in like a shareable article, and it was the only outlet that had covered this. And I found it like a few months after it happened. They installed the panels in October, and I reported on it in April. So I decided to try to make a trip up there with a friend who was generous enough to drive me. So basically the story was that the Winnichannock Shinnecock Preschool, which is one of 7 tribal buildings on the reservation, installed solar panels. It's the first tribal building to go completely renewable or renewable at all. And it was really, a community effort is what I found out. They were helped by Sun Nation, which is a local solar energy installing company, and the Long Island Progressive Coalition. And it was basically done pro bono by Sun Nation, and the LIPC really helped foster that relationship. Their bills dropped from, I believe, $2,000 to a month to just over $300. And that's just like their backup costs and stuff. I spoke to Denise Merchant, who is the educational and childcare consultant, and also Natani Dennis, who is the current director of the preschool over there. And I remember that when I was talking to them, they were talking about how the decision to put the solar panels on the preschool specifically was really a community decision. It was a decision made by the community, keeping the community in mind. It was important for them to, have their young ones, their future essentially, have these resources that they could take out of the costs they were putting into their electricity bill and put it towards, their children, basically. And that really struck me about how these community-oriented decisions were making. And I kind of realized, how a lot of experts believe that we should be making these decisions towards the climate crisis with our community in mind. When I was, while doing my research, I also found out that tribal lands have major renewable energy potential. They can sustain 4 billion megawatts, which is 5.1% of the U.S.'s energy needs. However, there are also stumbling blocks to especially impoverished communities transforming to renewable energy. One of these is that solar panel installations in especially residential homes can cost anywhere up from $16,000 to $35,000, which means it can take up to 20 years for people who have installed solar in their homes to recuperate the costs that they've invested in it. And off the reservations, people can, lump that costs in with their mortgage, but on the reservation, that's not possible. I also spoke to Philip Brown, who is the director of housing at the Shinnecock Nation, and, it was the first story that I really reported on outside of Hofstra, and I kind of realized that how much you can learn about a community just by meeting a few members about, from it. He told me about many future stories that are coming up, and I followed up with him recently about some of those. They have a cannabis dispensary that they're currently building, and I spoke to him last week, and he told me that they're currently working on a transitional housing development project for people in transition, unemployed people, unhoused people, and this transitional, development project is going to be completely run on solar and hydrogen fuel cell systems, which is completely renewable. And a big part of this is because of They got a grant from a company called, I believe it's Grid Alternative. They got a grant of $200,000. And so when this, gets built sometime next year, I hope to be there to cover it. Similarly, when I was there, Natani and Denise told me about how the nation was hosting its first powwow since 2019 because of COVID, and they invited me up to cover it. And, the Herbert School was generous enough to fund my and my co-reporters' trip up there. We stayed there overnight. We attended 2 days of the powwow, and it was just one of the most incredible experiences I've ever had. It was just that sense of community that I was talking about earlier was very present, and it was also, again, a chance to foster relationships, to learn and understand the culture of communities that we're covering, not just in the sense of that they are, on the receiving end of harm or there is harm done within the community, but stories of joy, stories of celebration, stories of love. So that's it. Thank you.
Yeah, we're gonna sit on the stage. Turn off the projector. All right, come on up.
Is my microphone on, Adrian?
All right, so in this part of the program, we wanted to look a little bit at what they were doing, they have been doing, and in this part of the program, we kind of want to look ahead at the issues that we as a news organization should be covering in the future. And so these guys have some questions that they want to ask of Rob and Adrian, in part to help better understand the issues at hand here on Long Island, and there are myriad issues here on Long Island. Having covered the environment on Long Island for 30 years, I can tell you there are a lot of issues. But these guys are going to take over and ask a few questions. So why don't we start with Madeline?
Okay. So my first question is for Adrian. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the Clean Air, Clean Water, Green Jobs Environmental Bond Act and
Excited you asked about that.
and the importance of voting on it in November.
Okay, this is my favorite topic between now and November 8th. Who here knows what is the Environmental Bond Act? Just raise your hand. Don't go on a soliloquy or anything. Nobody. This happens every time I do a presentation on it, so don't feel
I think that's
bad.
a story, Madeline.
Okay.
Madeline, it would be a really good story. Call me Monday. But for the first time in 25 years, we have a, good thing you're sitting down, $4.2 billion Environmental Bond Act on the ballot this November 8th. This Bond Act has 4 categories. I'm going to go into the weeds just for a quick second, but I want you to know this. $650 million for water infrastructure, paying for things like upgrading sewage treatment plants, paying for things like filtering your drinking water from emerging and toxic chemicals, things like that. Another $650 million for preserving land. We actually, even on Long Island, have some land left, and we would like to preserve what's left. But it's $650 million for the whole state. Then it's $1.5 billion for fighting climate change, and I think it's like 1.1 or 1.2 billion for making coastlines more resilient. That's a big one for Long Island and New York City, but not limited to that. Areas in the Great Lakes are also suffering from climate change issues as well. You got to flip your ballot over. It's Proposition 1. Might be the only proposition on the ballot as far as I know, but if not, it's still Proposition 1. And what we're concerned about is nobody knows about it. Now, I just want to say, one thing that is frustrating is we had a giant press conference on it 2 weeks ago. We had Democrats and Republicans there. We had labor groups. We had business groups. We had environmentalists. We had diversity there of different, like, you know, the League of Women Voters, like all these different entities. And we had TV cameras there, but no print media. Like, I don't know what news day they decided to snooze that day. Oh, it's like snooze day.
No.
Sorry. That was kind of good, right?
That was
So,
good. You just thought of that?
talk about, no, I actually used that before. Thank you, Scott. But I mean, you know, this is a relevant issue, right? It's gonna be on the ballot. There's a deadline. We're trying to get people to know about it. But, you know, I mean, we got radio there. We did get TV. 1 or 2 of the reporters got called away, you know, who were gonna come because there was like a car accident. So we can like talk about that later. But that's what the Environmental Bond Act is, and it really can set it's not gonna raise taxes. It's going to guarantee that within the state budget over the next 5 to 7 years, $4.2 billion will be allocated under those categories. And it's really something that we need. We like to say it's a necessity of funds or an investment of funds, not an expenditure of funds.
Okay. And Irby, you have the next question.
Yeah, so Adrian, what data should, you know, both journalists, but just people who are interested both at Hofstra or just on Long Island in general, focus on monitoring and looking into to sort of check if and where local institutions are in terms of how sustainable they're being and how harmful they're being?
Yeah, there's not a lot of data like that. I remember, you know, sitting on different committees and even like for the counties, Nassau County, Suffolk County, towns, and we had to figure out how green they were. It was a nightmare. They had to figure out how many, you know, street lights do we have so we could change the light bulbs to LED light bulbs. They had to figure out what was the electricity cost in each of their buildings, and if they changed the light bulbs out, this was, I'm going back in time when we first, you know, had LEDs and at that time compact fluorescents, but they didn't have any of this data. So I think what we want to do now, there's at least formulations that can be used to figure out for municipalities what is your carbon dioxide footprint. You know, how much gasoline do you use with your cars? And so it's really it's an easy question, but it really have to get into the weeds for electrical use, vehicle use, heat. What are the windows like in the buildings? It's a lot, but it can be done. I mean, if they just put solar on the roofs, that makes a huge difference.
Okay. Madeline.
So Rob, my next question's for you. So what are some of the biggest things that community members can do to most effectively clean up Long Island water bodies?
Join Operation Splash.
That's a good starting point.
It's just when we talk to people, and I'm, you know, some pretty smart people, most people don't understand where their trash goes when it goes down a street drain. They, you know, they think it goes to some magic place and it gets taken care of, but that magic place is either Long Island Sound or the Bay, and then we got to go chase it around. So just a little bit of knowledge will go such a long way. And we had a, you know, piece recently in Newsday where that was the main focal point when I was talking to the reporter. If you put anything out there, just let people know that your street trash becomes bay trash. You know, and that would fix a lot of problems. That would help put us out of business, which is what we're desperately trying to do.
But that's a good quote. Street trash becomes bay trash.
Yeah.
I'm going to use that.
Go, right?
That is good.
That's good.
Yeah, and I saw that piece in Newsday. That was a nice piece
It was
that they
wonderful.
did.
Yeah, we worked very hard to get the facts correct, and the reporter was fantastic. She's actually not a, you know, full-time reporter. She,
Right.
you know, part-time, but she did a really good job.
And nice photography and the whole nine
Yeah,
yards.
yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, we've never gotten that, just so you know.
All right.
Well, we like to say when you throw something away, where is away? And I think the public still doesn't get, you know, I throw it away, or What
Yeah.
frustrates me, I don't know how you deal with it, Rob, because drives me crazy, but I can't, sometimes I think of you. When you're driving and someone throws something out the window,
Yeah.
I don't get it.
Yeah.
Well, it's just, the way people are these days. Everybody's go, 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 rush, rush, rush. And there's so much noise coming at everybody, you almost having an anxiety attack the minute you wake up in the morning. If you turn on the news, you're already freaking out before you even have a cup of coffee. So, it's such a crazy world that we live in now. And, it's a different kind of media exposure that I think we're exposed to. Everything is breaking news, this, breaking news, that. There's a cat in a tree, breaking news. They bust in, and it's really not breaking news. And that just kind of overloads everybody, and it kind of dulls our senses to what's really important. Looking out for one another and trying to take care of the only planet that we have at the moment, and making sure that we're all okay at the end of the day, and not overloaded with too much static.
Well, can I just jump in here and add a question there? So, when we say the bays, and one of the classes I teach is issues in science reporting, and Rob is always nice enough to host our students on one of his boats, and we take them out and into the wetlands. They participate in a cleanup and then report on the cleanup. But they're always surprised by the wide range of garbage that's out there, that you literally can find anything. They've picked up, they themselves have not picked up, but guns have been found.
Yeah.
It ranges from, what, can you talk a little bit about like the wide range of garbage that you find in the wetlands?
Well, the most recent one that comes to mind is during Shark Week, which is always a fun time in the summer. One of our crews found a shark vacuum floating out in the bay, so they brought it in. A shark vacuum.
Vacuum.
Yeah, so they found a vacuum floating in the bay, and we posted it on our social media. If anybody lost a shark, we have it here. And a couple kayakers said, we saw that floating out there, but it was too big to put on our kayak. But well, Sandy was a whole game changer, and we found hot tubs and oil tanks and grandfather's clocks out there in the bay. But we still continue to find hot water heaters, television sets, suitcases. Just no matter what you think is not going to be out in the bay, we're not really surprised anymore, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Tell them the most common things you find.
These things. We pick about 30 to 40,000 of these out of the bay each year. I forgot my water bottle in my car. I was a little disheveled getting here, but like I said, I'm trying to do my best to kick the plastic habit, because we find so much of it out there. And if it's recycled and handled properly, that's one thing. But we find so much of it out in the bay. It's disgusting, and it never goes away. And then when it breaks down, it's microplastics, and that's when the trouble. We feel we haven't discovered how bad it's going to be yet, but we're learning pretty quickly about microplastics in our environment. So even something like this, even though it's small, it's like a little ticking time bomb that we're going to have to come to deal with one day.
One thing I just want to jump in and say, policies work. Remember when we used to go to the grocery store and you'd get 50 plastic bags? Now you don't. And how many plastic bags? One of the ways we got that law was we used, talk about data, we used Operation Splash's data. And they would give us data saying this is how many plastic bags we found each year, this is, and we would use their data about how many plastic bags they were pulling out of the bay. And legislators couldn't ignore that data. And we brought that data to the halls of Albany, and that's one of the ways, and it was really great to have it because nobody else had that data, except for Rob. And it became evidence that we need to stop plastic bags, which we have. So now you find much less or hardly any, or what's the deal?
Yeah, we average between 10 and 12,000 plastic bags pulled out of the bay every single year. The number went to 8,000 last year, which was an encouraging sign, but that's still 8,000, too many. But, we do collect certain data that we feel is important, for groups like ours, that we can let our elected officials know, hey, this stuff is finding its way out into the wild, and it's killing magnificent creatures. And we don't want to, it's a sin for anything to kill because, we let our garbage get out there. So,
Well, and the other states don't have the ban yet, like New Jersey and stuff, so a lot of their stuff also ends up.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember being on one of your cleanups and a plastic bag covering some of the mud, and underneath there were probably a couple dozen dead fiddler crabs because they had lost all their oxygen and they were suffocated by the bag. One bag.
Yep.
So yeah. Okay, Madeline, you got the next question.
So Adrian, flipping a little bit.
I think you skipped. Did he skip you?
Oh wait, did he?
Yeah.
Oh, did I?
Oh, you can go.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I'll help you out here. Sal.
Irving, thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
I lost track.
My question's for Rob. You deal with a lot of community members, volunteers especially. There's a lot of not necessarily debate, but discourse around individual responsibility versus corporate and governmental responsibility when it comes to the climate crisis, and cutting down on pollution and emissions. How do people, would you say, deal with individual climate guilt and anxiety that seems to be everywhere, consuming us these days?
That's a good question.
Excellent question.
That is a very thought-provoking question.
Well, you can answer the question also, Adrian.
Yeah.
No, Rob.
You go ahead, Rob.
Oh, yeah. Well, like Adrian and I, we team up a lot together, and we put pressure on people. And if you understand the issues, and you have to always keep in the back of your mind that when you boil everything down, it comes to dollars and cents and money when you're dealing with corporations. That's always the bottom line is, what are they going to get back, especially the stockholders. So once we understood that, if you can, boycotts have worked in supermarkets, in different places where they're, like I said, we had a place in Freeport where they were metal etching, and we discovered that their drains in their floor were going right into the bay.
Oh, really?
So we, within 2 weeks, we had 50 people outside their building marching up and down with signs and notified the DEC.
And how did you discover that?
A little bird flew in the window and told us.
Okay, all right.
Actually, one of the people that worked there, he had a guilty conscience. He said, I can't do it anymore. So he said, I'm telling you what happens. We tried to get into the building. We called the police. The police were not allowed in the building. And then we went to where the drains were, and we collected samples from the sediment, had the sediment analyzed. We had proof. And that's where a lot of, the science communities come in. We rely heavily on everything we do is based on science and data. We cannot go, and Adrian knows this as well as the rest of, you can't go to an elected official and say, we think you should do this, or why should we do that? Well, here's the science and the data to back up why you should do it, and you'll look really good if you do it. So that's kind of our secret formula for getting things done, is just having science and data to back up your talk, and then moving forward with that.
We like to say good science and good common sense yield good policy. And we work really closely also with Stony Brook University and any other university, because they have that whole clean water center there. And you've spoken to Dr. Gobler, and it actually was it's been very interesting. And I'm going to take a little credit here. I feel like the activist community has empowered the scientific community.
Yeah.
Because there was a time, and I've been doing this also since I was 13.
Yeah.
For
It's easy to get
35
better.
years, like yourself, Mario. And there was a time when scientists just wanted to do science. And they just did science. But with this new kind of group of scientists, like Dr. Gobler, he wants to see his science used for good and to make changes. So a lot of people don't know Chris used to work for me when he was in college. So he learned a skill set of advocacy and how to be articulate and to talk to the public and do presentations and to understand that, science is really important in our society, but science that can change either policy, public behavior, our choices of technology to make us cleaner, safer, and healthier, that's a way of moving society forward and helping society grow and be better. And so we really value our partners in academia and in the scientific community and work really hard to give their work a voice and a purpose in how we make change.
Nice. Okay, now it's Madeline's turn.
Okay. Okay, so Adrian.
Yes.
I wanted to kind of follow up on what you mentioned earlier about the press meeting you had and, you know, how no print journalists showed up. Do you think that the environment and environmental issues are getting enough media coverage? Because I mean, I swear, every time I Google something, your name's on the press release, so.
Well,
So, yeah.
we do. We work really hard at our office. You know, we have a team of people. And I'm going to say this, and I don't want this to sound cold or callous, because I would not describe myself or my coworkers as cold or callous. But, you know, when you open up the newspaper or you watch really the TV news, you know, the first thing is about car accidents and fires and some tragedy. And yes, that's important. But, you know, if you were doing something about, you know, drinking water quality and toxic chemicals in the Long Island aquifer system, which story is going to touch more people? I'm going to say probably knowing or understanding a drinking water issue. So if we have an emerging toxic chemical, PFOA or PFOS or 1,4-dioxane, in your drinking water, that's going to be relevant or impacting to 3 million people. If there's, and again, I'm not belittling this, but I'm saying if there's a car accident on the corner of Smith Street and Jones, that's going to impact a smaller, but yet that gets a lot of press, and the drinking water issue either gets a little press or is passed on. So I really think, you know, look, I'll just say it, Newsday used to have environmental reporters. That was their beat. We would get to know them. They would understand our issues. They understood how an aquifer works. They understood where we got drinking water from. They understood the bays. They don't have it anymore. So now when I do a press release, I have to literally email to 22 different Newsday reporters, most of which probably hit delete. I mean, we still get press. You know, we were in 2 articles 2 days ago. I can't complain. But it's harder. Same thing with News 12. They used to have environmental reporters. Then they fired all their senior staff. And we've all known News 12 has gone downhill in the last year. Except for Danielle Campbell. She's still a senior reporter. She's still there. She still works aggressively to get assigned to all the environmental stories. But it's a fight now. Like, it used to be better a couple years ago, and now I don't know if it's budget cuts. I don't know if they like to do these more sensational stories. I don't know what lurks. You could tell me, both you guys, what lurks in the hearts and minds of reporters, but it seems like it's starting to take a back seat, just as we need it to actually be more front and center.
Well, it's certainly, obviously, a source of frustration for the advocacy community. Herbie.
I guess this question is for both of you guys. Do you think Long Island and New York lawmakers and legislators are on the right track, or at least like a positive track when it comes to effective climate action?
There you go.
Okay, well, I think that the climate action bill that we passed 3 years ago really is good. And right now, we're really working hard to implement it, but and it's a lot. Offshore wind, you know, I mean, we have to make this transition. Offshore wind, sometimes, I've been to every community meeting regarding offshore wind. People still have a lot of myths, and I don't want to take the time now, but people stand up at these community meetings and they say crazy things, you know. Well, I heard that the blades are going to break off and they're going to fly off into the ocean and no one will know. I mean, literally, that's a direct quote. And I was like, no, actually, they're not going to break. These $1 billion, 21st century technology. And if it did, for some crazy reason break, everyone will know. They're monitored in a computer system. But there's just, you know, people like it kills birds. And I'm like, yes, it does. But very small amount. And what really kills birds is fossil fuels, oil spills, but climate change is shifting birds' habitats. We can go into all that. That's what's killing birds, and we have to make a choice. So I think, and the reason I'm telling you that is, we even get this stuff from elected officials. So the policies have been good. We're still working hard to educate each elected official, whether it's a state or a county, so they can understand that these policies have to be implemented and they need to be a part of it. It's a big part of what we do is meet with elected officials and really kind of get them up to speed. And I don't, it is frustrating, but I understand, like, they're supposed to know everything, right? Like school budgets, and they're supposed to know taxes, and they're supposed to know health care. And then I'm talking about, saving the planet. So I don't mind doing that. It's just a lot.
Yeah, no, they're, Adrian, every time, either the office changes or we get somebody new in,
That's true.
you go, all right, they're lawyers, they know law, but they don't know much else. They may know, depending upon what kind of law they practice. But like Adrian said, there's so many different things they have to be aware of, and budgets and whatever, school guard crossings, that when it comes to the environment, we have to kind of bring them up to speed. And like Adrian said, we don't mind. And I said, I always remember when Todd Kaminsky got elected, the first phone call he made was to us, like, can you tell me what I got to know? Because I just came from a Brooklyn law office. I really don't know much about it. Even though I live in Long Beach, I need to be brought up to speed. And, to his credit, he was not afraid to admit that.
That's right.
And we just said, here's some of the stuff that you should really be focused on and understand. So, when you get called out or when you're up in Albany, you can help us out here, show us a little love. So, a lot of them do that more and more, which is very encouraging. So we need them. They're the ones who make the laws that we have to live by. So without them,
Right.
It's a slow go.
And one day I could tell you stories of, look, the environmental movement's come a long way in the eyes of elected officials. Now they're like, okay, people actually do like clean water. People actually like people like Rob and Esposito. That disturbs them a little bit. I'm not going to lie. But in the old days, like, it was, a senator, I sat with the majority leader of the Senate, who was from Long Island. I won't name names, but he went to jail. He would only meet with CCE, wouldn't meet with any of the other environmental groups, but he met with us because we were active in his district with Rob and the other environmental groups locally. So he would meet with me, and I'm not even joking. Okay, you got 6 minutes. I'd say, that's all I need, Senator. Here's what we need to do. We're working on Bay Park, and I'd do boom, because, I know how to deal with, this boom, 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 boom. Okay, thank you. Okay, thank you, Senator. We'll look forward to the follow-up. That was the meetings. And I'm not exaggerating. But then he would go do it. But he kind of, you could tell, like, resented it a little bit. But it's better now. Now it's like everyone wants to wrap themselves around environmentalists because, 88% of the public considers themselves an environmentalist. I don't know what that means because 88% of the public doesn't recycle. But they like to consider themselves environmentalists.
All right.
Sorry, I got a little long there, sorry.
Yeah. No, we totally
Don't go
understand.
Brooklyn on them.
I went a little Brooklyn there.
You're venting that frustration. That's good.
This is like a therapy
It's a
session.
there you go. Excellent. Well, now I'm going to ask a question of these guys over here, and then maybe you can chime in, the two of you, and then we'll wrap up with some questions. Yeah, we're right about time. So just in terms of, you've been doing this now for a year and a half or so in both of your cases, and you've gone out and you've started to develop relationships. Can you talk a little bit about how the two of you have gone about developing the relationships that you have with folks like Adrian to do your reporting and the importance of that as journalists? And then maybe the two of you could talk about it from your perspective as well. But I want to start with the student journalists.
Yeah, I can start. So, yeah, at first it's just reaching out and emailing, but at this point, I think Adrian has been quoted in all of my environmental stories. So it's really good to build relationships because then those organizations get to know me and know that I'm interested in covering them, and I'll get emails or insight. And really, I just want the environmental advocacy communities to know that, I'm here to stand up for that and report on that. And, I mentioned Dr. Gobler at Stony Brook University, and I think like the first time I interviewed him, I emailed and he was like, okay, I can like give you a 5-minute phone call. And then like 2 weeks ago, I sat on like an hour-long Zoom call with him while he went over his most recent report like in detail with me. So I think it's just really nice to build those, you know, relationships, and then your reporting can get even farther and people can become more educated, because sometimes like scientists, it's hard to translate the way they communicate to the way to people who like aren't scientists to know. And so I feel like that's our job, is to make it digestible to people who maybe aren't interested or aren't educated in it. So
I think for me, a big part of just reporting on the Shinnecock Nation in particular, or just any marginalized community or communities that have been underrepresented in news, and just, you know, life in general, was understanding where they're coming from and what they've been through. And I think that involves more than just understanding the pain they've been through. It's also, like I said earlier, understanding the joy that they've been through, and understanding their celebration and their culture. And Ryan Madden at the Long Island Progressive Coalition actually told me how he fostered that relationship with the Shinnecock Nation, which was just actually going there and listening and being present and not really expecting anything big out of it, just understanding. And that can do so much in, you know, helping you foster those relationships. Yeah.
Nice. And from your perspective, as the advocates, what can journalists do to foster the kind of relationships that lead to good reporting?
Ladies first.
Relationships. I mean, honestly, every reporter I work with reporters at Channel 2, Channel 4, Channel 5, not so much Channel 7. I'm still waiting to have a relationship with Chantel. But 11, 12, I text them. I mean, literally, you know, I text them, they text me, what do you know about this? What do you know about that? I mean, we really do have a good relationship. And, you know, sometimes I get together with them, we'll go to lunch, we'll go to breakfast, I give them a lowdown, what's happening next month, a lot of times they ask for things to be clarified or explained. I worked with Dr. Gobler and also Carl LeBou, who's a marine scientist with the Nature Conservancy. We had about 3 or 4 reporters in for a 2-hour session to explain to them how the hydrogeology of Long Island works, and some of Chris's data, and just to give them a foundation for reporting. And that was, you know, really important.
Yeah, no, like Adrian said, relationships are very important. You know, we're working with people now going on 30 years with the same people off and on, and it's always nice when you have, you know, past that you're not, you know, anxious about meeting them. You don't want to harpoon anybody if you don't have to. I mean, sometimes you have to, but most of the time you want to just try to keep it civil, build on relationships, and try to work together, because once you make somebody mad at you, you know, it's tough to get back in that door again. And a lot of times you might find you're going to need that person down the road. So we try not to be too aggressive, you know, unless we absolutely have to. But, you know, you want to try to develop a good relationship and a trust with it, where you're not going to get sold out. And a lot of the elected officials that we talk to and we deal with, that's already developed and known when we go in to meet with them. We're never going to throw them under the bus.
Right.
Whatever gets said in that room stays in that room, unless they give us the okay. So, you know, it's a give and take, but, you know, it's you'll find out that's the way it works in the world these days. So,
I will say, though, I have alienated 1 or 2 reporters in my day. Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
Not me.
No, not you. No, not you, because you are always honest and fair. I don't always expect good stories. I expect fair stories. I have worked with reporters in the past who I worked with, he was just anti-wind. Every article he wrote was like, and I'm like, but you didn't even, I was at the same meeting you were. there was one person or two people who spoke up against wind, and there were 50 people who spoke up for it, your article makes it look like it was a melee against wind. Well, those people deserve to be heard. I said, yes, but well, how do you feel about the other 50 people who spoke? They don't deserve because they agreed with it? So what I do want to put out there is what we struggle with in the environmental movement. It's like what happened with climate change. 99% of the scientists said the climate's changing, and it is because of, the Industrial Revolution. It is because of man-made causes. 2% said it's not. 2% got just as much or more press than the other 98%. So people thought climate change was controversial when it really wasn't. That delayed global action on climate change, and that's a problem. So I have felt like, for me, it's you don't want to alienate a reporter, but if I got to do it, I do it. There's one right now I won't talk to, and I don't send them my, press stuff, and because I'd rather have no story than a convoluted bad story that doesn't reflect the reality of a situation. Again, I don't always expect a good story, but I'd like an accurate story or a fair story.
Excellent. And why don't we just end on a positive note here, because obviously there's a lot of controversy and difficulty in covering the environment, but...
But wait, can I just say,
Okay.
but most reporters I love, and I have long-term relationships
Yeah, well,
with.
yes, we believe you, Adrian.
Maybe I didn't convey that.
No, we believe you. But why don't the two of you talk a little? So you've had a chance now to be environmental reporters for a while now. Not a long time, but long enough that you can start to feel the impact of your work. Can you talk a little bit about the impact that you feel your work has had so far?
I think mostly education. I think that the environment that is something that is sparsely covered in the media. I don't see it a lot, and it's always like hidden in some like subcategory of the website that nobody's gonna like click on unless they're really like environmentalists. And I think this issue isn't just for people who are educated about the environment and are environmentalists. It's for everybody because we all live here. And so I think the biggest thing I've seen is education to people I've talked to. They were like, oh, I've lived here my whole life and I had no idea that like our drinking water was like this toxic and that this amount of money was going into treating it and all this kind of stuff. And I just think that the general public deserves to know that, and they shouldn't, have to try so hard to know that. So I think, that's been one of the most gratifying things for me is to, do the work, uncover these things, talk to the experts, and then present it to people in a way that they can understand and be informed and proceed from there. So.
Yes to everything Madeline just said. But I think for me personally, I think the impact I've noticed, so, historically and still today, communities of color, low-income communities are the ones that are most impacted by climate change. They have been since the Manhattan Project. I think going to the Shinnecock Nation, going to one of these communities and covering it, especially in my case for a positive story, I think I'd like to think that I hope I had an impact on them. I hope some of them have said they feel like they can come to me and they can trust me. And to add to the point that I said, before about fostering those relationships, I think also because I'm a student reporter, I'm still in college, it is very understandably, it is understandable that people might not take me as seriously. So I think, going and proving that you actually care about the story, you're not just doing it for an assignment or for a byline, and showing that, you care about the outcome of the story, following up, or just asking them how they are every few weeks and months. That's been nice. I've also made friends. That's always nice. So.
Yeah. Good. All right. Well, I wanted to begin with students and end with students because that's what it's all about here at Hofstra. Does anybody have any questions from the audience? And we are a room full of reporters, so I'm hoping. Yes? Yeah, there's a mic over there, so you just have to go over to the mic.
Okay, hi everyone. So this may be controversial, but I have to ask. So you mentioned
Good.
something about like 88% of people care, right? But you know that Bond Act coming up in the back of the ballot, I didn't know. So do you feel as though there is a political or some underlying reason why something as that big coming up so soon isn't known? Have you felt like there is some sort of agenda you're fighting against, although it may feel like there's a majority of support, even if it is performative? And, you know, your response to that?
That's a good question.
You know, well, first off, I want to say we took polls before we put this on the ballot. And, you know, they were good, but not great. So we sometimes, and that's a really good question, because sometimes we don't know what we're fighting against. 25 years ago, an Environmental Bond Act passed, but 15 years ago, when it was on the ballot again, it failed, 48 to 52. And so out of the woodwork came this taxpayer association and these tax like groups, which I had never heard of before, and I think they just like formed to be against the Bond Act, and they just, you know, do what sometimes made-up groups do, which is, you know, lie about the cost, lie that government's just going to waste the money, don't vote yes, and the Bond Act went down. So this year, there's a concerted effort, there's like 160 environmental groups throughout the state of New York working together. We're promoting it starting now, starting mid-September, so that if there is opposition, they don't have as much time to get organized. So I'm hoping that starting the end of September and then all through October, you'll start seeing ads, digital ads, hopefully, you know, more print media covering it, more TV. So keep your fingers crossed. But I don't really know the answer to your question. Sometimes I always feel like I'm fighting some unknown force, because when you're fighting for change, there's always some entity that doesn't want that change. And you don't always know who it is or why it is or what it is, but you just keep moving forward.
Now, have you guys been on WRHU, our radio station?
Yes, many times.
Oh, good.
We have
Okay.
lots of good positive contacts there with wonderful people.
Excellent. Okay, that's good to hear. Do you have a follow-up?
I have another question.
Excellent.
Which may be out of the scope of Long Island. So I'm from Pakistan, and currently Pakistan, I don't know if you have seen in the news, is dealing with horrible floods, which is a direct linkage to, you know, the climate crisis. It's due to the mountainous region melting along with the heavy monsoon rains. So my question is more so, you know, outside of Long Island, looking at the globe, looking at the world, environmental justice is still, like I said, something along the lines of politics, and it's just not, I don't think it's being prioritized. So how would you like to see the future with global politics around environmental justice?
Well, I'd like us to swing into action full speed ahead. And look, America can lead. You know, up to a couple years ago, we did lead. Then, you know, we had a president who didn't want to lead the world, wanted to dominate the world, but didn't want to lead the world. And there's a difference. Being a leader is a skill set, and it's an intent, but you have to lead by example. And you know, our organization's only statewide, so that's why we worked really hard on the Statewide Climate Act, because New York then sets a pathway forward for America, and America sets a pathway forward for the world. Because we can't just do it with our nation, right? We need China to come on board. We need Russia to come on board. Actually, you know what? China has more offshore wind than America. China has like 15,000 of megawatts of offshore wind. America currently has 30. So, you know, other countries are not doing enough. I'm not saying that, but they are stepping up on some of the technologies. But to answer your question directly, we're a statewide group, so many times we work on statewide issues with an eye towards influencing the rest of our nation to influence the world. But we have to begin at home.
Well, and can I just add to that? I think it's so important to recognize that the atmosphere doesn't have any boundaries. So, what we're putting into the atmosphere here in New York has an effect on Pakistan and the rest of the world. So, I think that's part of what we teach here at the school in terms of environmental reporting, that the things that we do here have an effect worldwide. So, yeah.
Thank you for sharing, for your time.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Yeah, Dean Luke.
Hi, Scott. Thank you for putting this together, and thank you to the students and everybody for participating. I'll try to figure out how to phrase this exactly.
Is it controversial?
It depends how you answered, Adrian. I think we've seen over certainly the last decade, a real loss of trust in all kinds of institutions, including the national press and the national media and national journalism. One of the few places it seems that trust has been retained a little bit is on the local level, community journalism. What we've also seen during the pandemic is the incredible politicization of science and science denialism. What I'm curious about is, Rob and Adrian, at the local level, when you go into community meetings, are you seeing that same denialism starting to creep into those venues? Do you have people come in, Rob, and say, no, you're lying about the number of bags you collected in the Bay. You're just making that up. Or Adrian, when you present scientific facts or the research from Stony Brook, it's one thing to debate what the policy should be, that's fine, but do you have people just denying the facts?
Oh, hell yeah. I got into a fist fight in a bar because I said, the term global warming.
Oh my God.
Yeah, some guy went nuts.
Really?
Oh, yeah.
Wow.
People are, like Adrian said, I guess they're afraid of change. I don't know what it is in their minds, but they just, bury their head in the sand. They want things to stay the way that they are. And, a lot of people are worried about, with the Bond Act, is it going to affect my job? Like the building trades, people who are in the fossil fuel industry, power plants, I worked in that industry, and I know that they were deathly afraid of anything with environmental or Bond Act, because that's going to, point the finger at them most of the time, and then they're going to have to react. And it's going to cost them money, and the shareholders are not going to like that. So there's a lot to it that we have to understand as environmental people who it's going to affect when you make these decisions to spend that kind of money and that kind of effort, pointing the finger at somebody saying, that power plant is, old, it should go away. There's people that have been working there for 30 years, and now they feel threatened. So we have to take some of that away with, trying to educate it. But, with the local press, I'm very comfortable with the local press. It's, the higher ups that, I don't know about Asia, but I don't trust them as far as I could throw them. Because you don't know what story you're going to get. I mean, you could, I've had, reporters talk to them for an hour on the phone, and then the story comes out. I'm like, that is not what I said. So, local level, I'm okay with that. But when you get to the higher ups, you got to really watch what you say and make sure that you, define everything that you mean. And like I said, try not to be threatening when you're talking about something like this, how it's going to help all of us. That's kind of the way we approach everything. It's not a push against you or pointing the finger at you. It's, we have to do something. We can't keep doing the same thing. We have to fix something. So come along for the ride. Enjoy the fix. It's going to be good. It's going to be good for you and your kids and your family. That's the whole thing. You got to make it a little more personal to them. So that's the road we try to go down.
Yeah.
Well, one thing I want to say is, there was a lot of polls taken before the Bond Act. And one of the questions asked was, who do you rely on to give you factual information about the environment? And your local environmental group scored like 88%, like really high. And then, it was like government was like in the middle, and the news was all down low. So fortuitously, when you're not in a bar having a conversation, people still, even according to the polls, trust the local environmental group to give them the facts that they need and that they can rely on. Are there the deniers out there? Yeah, we call them the Flat Earth Society, because no matter what you tell them, you know, it's just not going to be processed. And we do have more of them today. Or maybe they're just showing their colors more. I really don't know. But I think the vast majority of people still appreciate and want local environmental groups to be able to provide facts and information.
Great. Well, with that, we're going to wrap it up. I certainly want to thank Adrian and Rob for coming and giving their time. I want to thank our student panelists here, Madeline and Irvi, for their excellent questions. They all put a lot of time into this, so thank you so much.